When I was doing the research for Fall of Giants, I was shocked to realise that the First World War was a war that nobody wanted. No European leader on either side meant it to happen. Even the arrogant old Emperor of Austria who started it only really wanted a little local conflict with Serbia, a sort of punishment raid for the assassination of his nephew. But one by one, the emperors and prime ministers, without intending war, made decisions, logical, moderate decisions, each of which took us a small step closer to the most terrible conflict the world had ever known. The misery of the trenches, the horror of poison gas, a war in which 6,000 soldiers died every day for 4 years. A war which I came to believe was fought by mistake. The awful thought that occurred to me was, could that happen again? And I asked myself the question that is the beginning of every one of my novels. Could I write a story about that? How would it start? In my story, what would be our equivalent of the assassination that ignited World War I? I interviewed people involved in decision-making at the highest level and asked them what did they see as the flashpoints of today, the modern equivalents of Serbia or Alsace-Lorraine.
Kim Darroch was National Security Advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron and later British Ambassador in Washington. He's now Lord Darroch. My story involves connections between terrorism and organised crime, and you feel that's important.
A fascinating aspect to the story you are telling, because it took me back to my National Security Advisor days and what we used to hear about the connections between organised crime and terrorism, and particularly organised crime and people trafficking. Combine this with thinking about where do terrorists get their money from? Because it's quite an expensive business. Buying weapons, looking after yourself between your terrorist outrages or whatever wars you are fighting. I mean, it's not a very big step from, I promise you, from someone who does people trafficking to someone who works for or is part of ISIS. That connection is very, very close. Sometimes they're one and the same thing.
Baroness Catherine Ashton was for 5 years the European High Representative responsible for foreign affairs, effectively the foreign minister of the European Union. And she's a friend of mine, and she has read the first draft of Never and given me extensive notes. You've read my chapter in Never, in which a stolen American drone is used to bomb an African city. Can you tell me how you would picture the president and his or her cabinet reacting to that?
So all events that happen of significance across the world are monitored 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year in the Situation Room. Once the drone attack has happened, then of course the information that this was a stolen American drone will have been of huge significance. And so the president would convene a meeting in the basement of the White House in the Situation Room, where already gathered would have been the military staff and the national security team led by the National Security Advisor, who would be looking at the information and the evidence, and particularly in the context of the book, will have been very concerned about what the Chinese would have thought happened. And information would have gone directly to Beijing as swiftly as possible to explain this was not US action. Because these incidents, as the book so brilliantly shows, so quickly turn and change and move forward in ways that you cannot predict.
I studied the ways in which civilization today is menaced by terrorism, by the remorseless expansion of the Sahara Desert, by the reckless ambitions of newly wealthy countries and the stubborn determination of declining powers to hold on to what they've got. There's no shortage of dangerous situations. I thought of the great powers of today and asked, would our leaders be any better than those of 1914 at avoiding war, at finding peaceful solutions to quarrels between countries? I talked to people about how diplomacy may defuse a conflict and how pride and aggression can make a problem into a crisis. And I began to see the shape of my novel. It's a story that moves from the West Wing of the White House to the Sahara Desert and from there to Beijing. I imagined a small group of smart, dedicated, tough-minded characters struggling to prevent the outbreak of a terrible war. A young American woman working for the CIA in North Africa. A Chinese spy master married to a glamorous TV star. A handsome French secret agent. A woman president of the United States. When I started writing, I didn't know how it would end, and you won't know until the very last page. The book is called Never. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it never happens.